Hello everybody and welcome to another video. So for this one I thought what I'd do is continue my journey through my retro gaming collection, and today we're going to land on the Sega Dreamcast, which was Sega's last entry into the hardware market before they kind of went software only. Now the Dreamcast is the follow-up to the Sega Saturn, and much like the Saturn, it was the first of that kind of generation to land, releasing initially in Japan in 1998 and the rest of the world in 1999. Now the reason it was kind of the earliest one to land was because, like I mentioned, the Saturn was the first of that generation, or the first major system of that generation. There were many other consoles that floated around back then, but if we consider that generation, to be a battle between Sony, Sega and Nintendo, Sega got theirs out first. We don't really tend to talk too much about Commodore's, Amiga CD32 or the Atari Jaguar or the 3DO or whatever. They were there, but they were there. So part of this was because the Saturn just had not managed to meet expectations. It had released to confusion because Sega had just kind of went, oh, it's available now, which didn't make retailers happy. The PlayStation had released to massive critical acclaim, massive commercial success, and Nintendo were doing very well with the N64, including its library of games, and the Saturn just didn't stack up, so Sega discontinued it, I guess, fairly early-ish, like earlier than maybe they expected to, and started work on the Dreamcast. Now, the Dreamcast is a system that has quite a lot of legacy, especially for a system that was only around for about 2 or 3 years. It was discontinued in 2001, and we will go into that as I go through the games. But the Dreamcast is one that is remembered so fondly by a large number of people. It wasn't around for long, it didn't have the biggest library of games, but there are so many fantastic games in this library. And I'm going to be going through my collection, which has just a vast number of great titles there, that it's kind of surprising the Dreamcast was discontinued so early. But there are reasons for that, and it wasn't necessarily because the Dreamcast sold badly or did badly. There were other factors in play. So anyway, we're going to start going through the games for it. But before we go, we'll mention a few things about the Dreamcast. So one of the main draws with the Dreamcast is, not only was it the first of that generation to land, it also was the first system, and there are arguments about this because some consoles beforehand had some online functionality, but it was the first games console to really push online functionality and online play. It had a built-in modem which you could hook up, and you could play a fair number of games online. The main ones that come to mind are Chu Chu Rocket, Phantasy Online, and there was a port of Quake for it as well. All did very well and handled very well on the Dreamcast. So, it was... many people say it was ahead of its time. The tech in it as well was really, really good, offering, like Sega generally did, really good sort of arcade ports, which again, there's a couple in here which we'll go into. So, let's start having a look at some of the games. So, we're going to begin not with a game, but as with the Saturn 1, which had some quirky little controls that I had, we'll start with one of the quirky little things that the Dreamcast had. Now, like many of its contemporaries, the Dreamcast used memory cards. What Dreamcast used was this. It's called the VMU, and this slotted into the back of your controller. And what would happen is you'll notice there's a little LCD screen there and some buttons. You couldn't see these while they were plugged in your control, but what would happen is when you're playing a game, a little icon would appear on the LCD to sort of indicate the game you're playing. You could actually, I think you could customize this to some degree, like select different icons, maybe depending on the game or what was available. I'm not 100% sure on that, but it was a neat little thing to see while you were playing your games. But not only that, some games, if you had save files, you could take this out your controller, and it's got a little slot here for a 2032 battery. I think it's two 2032s actually. And you could play very, very basic games using the buttons here. I think, off the top of my head, Sonic Adventure is the one that comes to mind, a sort of Tamagotchi-esque Chow Garden, but I do think there were a few others there. So this is just one of the quirky little things that Sega did with the Dreamcast that does sort of make it stand apart, and I always think if you're going to talk about it, it's always cool to kind of mention this first. So let's actually get started looking at the list of games. So all of these are boxed. Let's get the first stack here. I haven't organised this as well as I normally do. So these are in alphabetical order. Now the Dreamcast boxes kind of stood out a little bit compared to the PlayStation box at the time. And this is the first title. This is Chu Chu Rocket. Also known as a little bit of a friendship ender as far as multiplayer games go. This is the sort of one where you will be playing it and having so much fun but also screaming at your friends. The idea of this, and it's such a good game. I love Chu Chu Rocket. The idea is you've got a grid, you've got mice that are released onto the grid, and you have to guide them using little arrows into rocket ships. Now, if you're playing, it can be played with up to 4 players. As you're placing your arrows, it will direct any mice that come across it. That includes mice that your opponents are after. So you can seriously screw them up and screw them over. And there's also little things that happen while you're playing it, like it might flash up and say change places, which changes where your rocket ship is. It might suddenly have like a mouse frenzy. It might release cats onto there, which will eat up the mice. There's all sorts that go on with this. It is easy to pick up and play. It is absolutely brilliant. It is a must-have for a Dreamcast owner. And even if you don't have people to play it with in multiplayer, there is a really good single-player puzzle mode which challenges you with various grades to place the arrows in the correct sequence to get the mice into the rocket ship while avoiding the obstacles. This was one of the games heavily pushed for the online feature. You can understand why. It unfortunately, like a few games that I might go through here, it seems to have fallen by the wayside. I'm very surprised this does not have a modern day port to it, because it's just one of those really, really good party games. And I think we're in an era where party games are so much more appreciated, so I'm very, very surprised this one does not have a port. That said, and we'll talk about this as we go through some of the games, Sega have said they are working on like updated versions of some of their classic games, so watch this space. Next up, Crazy Taxi, also known as that game with the offspring in it. Crazy Taxi was an arcade port, and this is one of the aforementioned games that is getting a modern remake or update. It was only announced at the time of recording this, last week at the Game Awards, I think it was. Crazy Taxi, a very simple premise. You are a taxi driver set about in a city, pick up a pedestrian, take them to the destination they want to go to in the quickest time, score points, keep that timer moving. It's fantastic fun. It doesn't... my description maybe has not done it justice, but it is brilliant. The soundtrack captures, just the era, the style, the attitude, the city itself. So much fun. Now, you have your main game mode where you have to, whenever you drop them off, you get extra time added on. This is a mechanic that has been copied numerous times since, by the way, in other open world games with taxi missions, or famously by The Simpsons in Simpsons Road Rage, which actually led to a bit of a lawsuit, which is a topic for another video. But again, another must-have. This has been re-released on other systems. I don't know how easy it is to get on the modern era, but I know it is on Steam. That said, if you have a Dreamcast, copies of that come around really, really cheaply, and it's also on the PS2, and copies are quite cheap. Crazy Taxi 2, of course. I've not really played this one as much. It's more of the same, really. It is just more of the same. Same style, same sort of concept. As with the previous one, it's got these sort of mini-games in there as well, which are quite fun. Can't really say too much about it. It is just more Crazy Taxi. So, again, you can't really go wrong. I think most people do prefer the first one, but they're both great. Just absolute must-haves. Next up is the most modern game in the Dreamcast library, and this is something that's quite cool about the Dreamcast, is that like many systems of all the days, you have people doing homebrew for it. And what makes homebrew in the Dreamcast quite cool, and it really wasn't cool at the time because the Dreamcast was very easy to, pirate games for, but this is a game called Intrepid Izzy. So, this is a game that's been developed for the Dreamcast, put onto a disc, and you can play it without modding your Dreamcast or anything. It was possible to play copied games on your Dreamcast without modding it. Double-edged sword, because you get cool homebrew like this now. Back in the day, absolute, minefield for pirates. But this is a really, really cool platformer game. Sort of Metroidvania elements to it. Really, really fun, really cool. I really like this. I'm not sure how easy this is to get hold of now, because some of these games do have limited releases, but definitely worth checking out. And, like I say, might lead you to find more cool things in the homebrew scene for the Dreamcast. Like I say, I know it's quite a flourishing scene. Next up, this is one of the games that is getting a modern-day remake, which I know will make many people happy. This is Jet Set Radio. So, Jet Set Radio, it sort of combines inline skating with graffiti culture. I make it sound so dry. It's just a really colourful, fun game. If you like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, the classic Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, you will absolutely love this. This has such a cool graphical style, great music, it captures the time so well. I love this. I'm not great at it, admittedly, but I love it so much. I love the style of it. I'm very, very glad to see it's getting a modern remake as well, because I know there have been people crying out for this. But really worth seeing where it all began on the Dreamcast. And like I say, just from these games you've seen, Dreamcast had such a good library. We've just seen really good ones, one after the other. Another one, I originally had this on the PlayStation back in the day. I lost my copy. When I got my Dreamcast, I got this, played through it. It's amazing. Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. Now, the Legacy of Kain is a big series, started with Blood Omen back in, 95, 96, I want to say. And it was, especially this one, it was known at the time for being one of the first games to really push high-level cinematics in games and be just that little bit more mature in terms of its storyline. Certainly, I don't think it was the first at all, but it really did push boundaries. Not only did it push boundaries in terms of narrative and that, but also the tech that is in this is super cool, because you have these two kind of worlds running concurrently, and you can seamlessly transition between. You've got the main world that you explore and fight your enemies and your bosses and all that in, but if you die, you get sent to a spirit world, where you have to do certain things to regain and go back into the other world. And like I said, they both sat side by side and you could transition between, which is really, really neat technology at the time. This is such a good action game. Raziel is such an iconic character. If there's one series or one game I would love to see remade, this is one of them. It's so good. It's so worthy of a remake. Next up is one of the quirkier games of the time. This is MDK 2. So you've got 3 different heroes here. They all play a little bit differently. You've got different styles of level and that. This is quite a fun game. I didn't complete it because it was quite difficult, and I'm not sure why. I just kind of fell by the wayside because there were other games, so I do want to return to it. But this is one of the examples of them games that just... I don't know really if we get games like this anymore. It's very... It's got a certain level of humour, a certain style to it, which just reminds me of the 90s, that late 90s period. But maybe not a must-have, but definitely worth checking out. I think you can get this on GOG. And finally, for this little patch that I picked up, Powerstone, another must-have. This is from Capcom. It's like a isometric-y, top-down, brawler-type game. You've got a lot of quirky characters you can see here. You pick one. The idea is you have to beat your opponents while picking up these gems that spawn and using all sorts of special abilities. This is one that I am genuinely surprised has not seen any sort of comeback, because especially with the rise of games like Smash Brothers, and you have things like Gang Beasts or what other quirky little games like that. Because this is like a 4-player brawler that is, again, pick up and play. It's so easy to just get into it. It's easy to learn, maybe hard to master, and just so much fun that I think anyone's capable of picking it up. And I'm so surprised that we have not seen a return of this. There was a port of 1 and 2 to the PSP of all systems. But, again, you sort of... arcadey online store releases, this would just be so perfect for it. So please, this is one would absolutely love to see this brought back. So let's pick up the final stack. I mean, there's not many left here. So if you're in the mood for a Diablo-esque game, this is one I picked up when I first got the Dreamcast. Record of Lodos War. I think it's based on like an anime and novel series. Certainly seen it about. It is essentially like a Diablo clone. I haven't played this in a very long time, but I remember enjoying it. I do remember it being quite tricky in places, but might be down just to me being bad at making builds for it. But it's... I've seen this is quite tricky to get hold of, quite expensive, so I don't know if it's an essential, but I do like this. Had a nice visual style to it. Again, if you like Diablo-esque games, it's well worth checking out, and I don't know how many of them sort of games there were on the Dreamcast. So, yeah. Now, next up, one that I think everyone should have in their Dreamcast library, although this is, again, available on a few more systems now, thankfully. And this one... the beast known as Shenmue. So Shenmue tells the story of I can't remember his surname actually. It tells the story of Ryo, who comes home, sees his father being attacked and killed in front of his very eyes, and he swears revenge against the man who did it. And you set about on your quest to find the man who did it, find out why, what happened, and uncover this huge sprawling story. Shenmue was originally conceived as like 5 to 6 games, and this is a huge landmark title, just in terms of interactivity with the game world, making a living, breathing world. You could say, if you're going to look at contemporaries, like what is around now, I think there's a lot of games that were influenced by Shenmue. But if you want to know one that I think is very directly, is the Yakuza franchise. So if you like the Yakuza games, definitely worth checking this out. Now, one of the other highlights about this... well, actually, no. We'll talk a bit more about the game. So, you set about on your quest to do it. You go and interact with people around you. They have schedules. They have times you can approach them. Times they're not there. You have shops that open at certain times of day. You have a day-night cycle. You have arcades you can go in. And you can actually play the real versions of some older games. There's like a few like Master System games in here. It's absolutely fantastic. And there are parts as well, like, you just have to live out the mundane day-to-day life. You can get, like, jobs to earn money and stuff like that. Now, the other thing I want to talk about, I mentioned the Dreamcast's short lifespan. I don't know how true it is without doing more research, but it is said that the budget for Shenmue and Shenmue 2 was so high that is part of the reason why Sega had to discontinue the Dreamcast. Basically, obviously, Sega helped fund Shenmue because it was a first-party title. They sunk so much money into it that it got to a certain point with like the release of the second one, and it was said that everyone who owned a Dreamcast would need to own a copy of this, or maybe even 1.5 copies of this. And Sega were confronted with this choice: either you continue in the hardware market pushing the Dreamcast, and you risk losing money, you risk going under as a business, which would have been devastating, not just to them and their livelihoods, but I think to the gaming community as a whole, because Sega had been so important for all the various issues they had in the latter part of the 90s. It's a valuable part, and I think we would dearly miss them. Or you discontinue the Dreamcast and live on as software only, which they eventually did. I'm not saying Shenmue is entirely to blame for that. I don't necessarily... I think it's, a little bit didn't help because of the sheer budget of it, but Sega had made so many bad decisions leading up to the point that maybe it was inevitable anyway. But it's part of Shenmue's legacy, and Shenmue's legacy as well is a fantastic boundary-breaking game that needs to be played by all. Now, you don't need a Dreamcast to play it. It's had ports to modern systems, so it's very easy to get hold of. I'm very, very thankful for that. There is also Shenmue 3, which was released a couple of years back. It was crowdfunded. It got a mixed reception. Sometimes when games get these modern sequels or whatever, they get mixed reception, because I think some people had an expectation of what Shenmue was and were happy with the third one to just kind of be the same as 1 and 2. Some people expected more and it to be more like a modern title, and it wasn't, so it got a little bit of a mixed reception. I've heard it is worth playing if you're a fan, but absolutely worth checking this out. Some elements maybe not age well, but this is one of those must-play titles. Next up, Another must-play title for the Dreamcast. And I don't know why I don't have an actual box for this. Sonic Adventure. So this was Sonic's... Okay, so let's say it's Sonic's first proper 3D outing, because I know Sonic 3D exists, but it's rubbish, it's not good, and it's very sort of... It's not... Well, it is 3D, but it's not like a full 3D experience, where Sonic Adventure was. Now, Sonic Adventure... Fantastic game. I love Sonic Adventure. Some elements of it have not aged as well. You don't just play Sonic in this, you have other campaigns you can do. You've got like the Sonic one, which is fine and good, the Tails one, which is alright. You've got Knuckles, which I'm not a fan of because it's, you know, a timed treasure hunt based on randomness. And then you have Big the Cat, and that exists. But the core Sonic Adventure game is really, really good. Some great level design in here. A bit of a stab at a sort of open world, like, free roam element in places as well. It's sort of central hub where you have to travel to your levels. It doesn't necessarily feel as great nowadays with some of it, but the core level and core gameplay is really good. And of course that's followed up by Sonic Adventure 2. Which I think a lot of people maybe know a bit more than Sonic Adventure because it has a very famous City Escape level, but is also responsible for the introduction of Shadow. Both Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 have received modern day ports, but that does come with a caveat. The ports are known for being quite buggy compared to the original Dreamcast version, and as such, I think these games have taken a bit of a knock on their reputation in modern day because of the buggier ports, especially the GameCube one. But even with that, I think these are well worth checking out. The Sonic campaigns alone, really, really good. Now, we come to... I think this might be the highest rated game on the Dreamcast, and one of the highest rated fighting games of all time. And if you know anything about me, you'll know I'm not a big fan of fighting games. I love this game. Soul Calibur. This is an arcade port. The sequel to, I think it's Soul Edge on the original PlayStation. This is such a good fighting game. I love this. I just really, I love the way Soul Calibur plays. I even love the newest one. I just really like the way it plays. I love the style of combat. I love the roster of fighters in there. This is an absolute must-have game for the Dreamcast. Even if you do have the sequels, it's just great to go back to see this and see where it all began. Seriously, get this one if you ever have this system. I don't think Soul Calibur 1 has had much in the way of a recent port or whatever. Fighting games are one of them weird ones. Street Fighter 2 gets about 40 ports, but a lot of fighting games, you know, tend to be sort of, once it's out, the sequel supersedes it, apart from Street Fighter, because I know, you know, there's certain things that's so central to those games, but definitely get Soul Calibur. And this is the game that made me want to get a Dreamcast, funnily enough. I played this at a convention many, many years ago. It's a mecha, like, 3D fighting game. This is really, really fun. It kind of takes from your Super Robot genre, rather than sort of your Gundam or your Evangelion stuff. It's, you know, a lot of silly, quirky characters in there. I played this at a convention, really, really liked it, and just thought, I'm going to get a Dreamcast. And 1 week later, after I got home, I bought a Dreamcast in this game. This is really, really fun. I know this has a bit of a cult following behind it. It's not necessarily the cheapest to get hold of. It certainly wasn't when I got it, and prices have only gone up since then, because that was about 15 years ago now. But I know, whenever I show my Dreamcast collection off, people... that you always get the odd person that shouts out this one and goes, "Oh my god, I loved that!" So it's worth checking out. It is really, really fun. And we come again to your multiplayer type game, and I think every system needs its own Worms game. Worms is very simple. For those of you who haven't played it out there, you have a team of worms. You have quirky weaponry ranging from bazookas to shotguns to exploding sheep to banana bombs to a holy hand grenade, all sorts of stuff. And you just have to wipe out the other team. It's got, like, destructible terrain. It's set on a 2D thing. Again, much like a few of the other games in this thing, very easy to pick up and play, and that is part of its success. I think Worms Armageddon is generally considered to be the magnum opus of the Worms franchise. It's generally considered to be the best one. I don't necessarily know if that's still true because they've released more 2D ones that are really good, and it's still the core Worms gameplay. But I know this one has like a huge following. It was really, really beloved at the time, and you cannot really go wrong with it. And now we come to our final game. I don't know too many wrestling games that were released on the Dreamcast, but we've got WWF Attitude, the last sort of Acclaim WWF game. I think they would go on to do the ECW games, which weren't great. I love WWF Attitude, but I know it's not hugely loved amongst wrestling game fans, and a lot of the newer ones are better. But this was one that I remember waiting for the PlayStation version of this for a very, very long time. I absolutely loved it. I loved this sort of introduction of a create an arena, create a pay-per-view mode. The create a wrestler modes are really, really good. The sort of rudimentary entrances there. It kind of gets knocked now because the controls are very, very strange to do like simple moves. You have to do like these weird button combinations, forward, down, back, square to do Billy Gunn's Famouser or whatever. But I really like this. I don't think it's an essential or must-have, but it was for me because just that pure nostalgia. And there you have it. As always, do let me know your memories of the Dreamcast, if you had one, what games you loved for it. If I've maybe, inspired you to go and check one out yourself. They're a great system. I really do. I love the Dreamcast, despite not having one when I was younger. Again, like a few of the systems I've covered, ones I came to later on. But it's a really lovely system, and I know there's a lot of love for it out there. So, as always, give the video a like, leave a comment down below, and thank you very, very much for taking the time to watch this. It's always super appreciated. Goodbye.